Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on the video, and comment what you thought about the story. My brother put peanuts in my food to test my allergy, and my parents protected him. Sunday dinners at my parents' house had this special talent for making me feel 12 years old again, which was impressive because I was 24, paying my own rent and working full-time at a dental office. Still, every Sunday I would drive over with a knot in my stomach and a tote bag full of emergency items like I was preparing for a camping trip instead of baked chicken and family judgment. My inhaler, my allergy card, my auto-injector, a backup auto-injector, safe crackers in case the food looked suspicious. My mother used to call it my little survival kit, but not in a cute way. More like, here comes Zadie with her little survival kit again, said with that smile that means she thinks she is being funny and everyone else should agree. My father would chuckle because that was his main parenting style. My brother would make a face like I had walked in wearing a helmet indoors, and I would laugh too because that was easier than saying, hey, maybe stop mocking the medical condition that could kill me. I know, I can hear you already. Why did I keep going? Because family has this stupid little hook in you, especially when you grew up being told that wanting basic care meant you were difficult. I kept thinking maybe if I stayed calm enough, helpful enough, normal enough, they would finally see me as a daughter and not an inconvenience with allergies. Spoiler, they didn't. My allergy to peanuts wasn't some vague, trendy thing I decided to have because I liked attention. I had my first serious reaction when I was little, and by the time I was old enough to understand what was happening, I also understood that my parents were annoyed by it. They weren't cruel in the obvious movie villain way. They took me to doctors. They paid for medication. They signed school forms. But emotionally, they treated every precaution like I was personally attacking their freedom to be casual. My mother hated asking restaurants questions because she said it made us look demanding. My father said I needed to learn not to live in fear. That was his favorite phrase, by the way. Don't live in fear. My brother, who was 17 by the time this happened, had grown up hearing them treat my allergy like a personality flaw. So of course he turned it into entertainment. When he was little, it started with stupid stuff, like pretending to touch my arm after eating candy and laughing when I flinched. Then it became hiding snack wrappers in my backpack, telling me something probably had peanuts, and watching my face, or rubbing his fingers together near my plate like he was a cartoon villain. Every time I got upset, my mother said, "He just wants a reaction." My father said, "Don't give him one." And somehow, magically, I was always the problem for reacting, never him for doing the thing. That Sunday started so normal, it almost makes me angrier now. Nothing dramatic, nothing with thunder and flickering lights. I had spent the morning cleaning my apartment and arrived a few minutes before 6 with coffee on my sleeve. My mother opened the door and looked me up and down. "Comfortable today?" she said. I looked at her sweater, which had a stain near the cuff, and almost said, "Apparently we both are." But I swallowed it. See? Growth, or cowardice. Depends on the lighting. My father was in the living room watching a game with the volume too loud. My brother was sprawled on the couch, phone in hand, feet on the coffee table, laughing at something on a group chat. He barely looked up. "Zadie brought the pharmacy," he said when he saw my tote bag. My mother gave one of those little breath laughs. My father said, "Leave your sister alone," but in the tone people use when they are secretly amused. I put my bag in the hall by the coat rack like I always did because my mother hated clutter near the table. That detail matters. I hate that it matters. Dinner smelled good, which feels unfair to say, but it did. Chicken, rice, roasted vegetables, and this thick, spicy sauce my mother had started making because she saw it on some cooking page. I asked, like always, "Anything with peanuts or peanut oil?" My mother sighed before I even finished. "No, Zadie, we know." My father muttered, "Every week," like my throat closing was a boring rerun. My brother put a hand over his heart and said, "We all survived the inspection." I wanted to leave right then. I really did. I even glanced at my tote in the hall and thought, just go home. But then my mother set down a plate and said, "I made extra rice the way you like it." And my stupid heart softened, because apparently I can be emotionally bribed by carbohydrates. So I sat down. My brother, suddenly helpful, stood up and said he would serve. That should have been my sign. My brother didn't serve anyone unless there was a camera, a girl he liked, or a way to make it annoying. But my mother looked pleased, like he had cured something, and said, "See, he can be sweet." I rolled my eyes, but I let him take my plate toward the kitchen because he said the sauce was still on the stove and he would bring mine back already covered. At the time, I barely registered it. People did random little things like that at my parents' house all the time. He came back less than a minute later with my chicken and rice buried under that thick, smoky sauce. I remember thinking it tasted heavier than usual, but not in a scary way, just different. I said, "Something is wrong." My mother didn't even look up. "What now?" I put my fork down. My hand was shaking. My mouth is tingling. My father exhaled through his nose. Annoyed already, which is wild because I had barely begun dying, and he was already, "Just my name," said like a... My brother looked at his phone. "Maybe it's spicy," he said. "You always say you like spicy food." I pushed my chair back. "No, this isn't spicy. This is allergic." My mother rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might detach. "There are no peanuts in the food." And maybe, if she had sounded worried, I would have doubted myself. But she sounded accused. Like my body reacting was rude to her cooking. My throat tightened again, and that old fear took over. The one that isn't dramatic or cute or anxiety. The animal part of your brain that goes, air. Now. I stood up too fast and the chair scraped the floor. My father snapped, "Sit down and calm down." My brother said nothing. That silence still sits in my chest. I tried to speak carefully because I knew the second I sounded panicked, they would stop hearing words and start hearing Zadie being Zadie. "I need my bag," I said. "My auto-injector is in my bag." My mother put her fork down and wiped her mouth like she had all the time in the world. "You aren't going to inject yourself at the dinner table because you convinced yourself you tasted something." I wish I could tell you I responded with a strong, clear line like a woman in a courtroom drama. I didn't. I said, "Mom, please," and my voice cracked, which made her face harden because weakness bothered her when it came from me. "Go sit in the living room if you're going to make faces," she said. My father added, "Or go to the bathroom and splash water on your face. You're working yourself up." My brother looked smaller suddenly. Not guilty enough to help, obviously. Just small enough to be afraid. That was when I knew. I knew before I had proof. I saw it in the way he wouldn't meet my eyes. I stumbled toward the hall, but my legs felt loose, like my knees had forgotten their job. My tote bag was maybe 15 feet away. 15 feet. I could see the strap hanging from the coat rack, which somehow made everything worse because help was right there. Close enough to make me feel stupid for not reaching it. My vision started doing that awful narrowing thing, the edges going gray. My mother said, from the table, "This is exactly what I mean. Every dinner. Every dinner." Like my airway was a social inconvenience. I reached for the wall and missed. My fingers slapped the paint. I tried to call out again, but my voice came out thin and rough. "Bag." My father stood up then, finally, but not to get it. He stepped into the narrow space between the dining room and the hall, not like he was trying to hurt me, but like he was trying to stop a tantrum. He held one hand out and kept saying, "Enough. Breathe." Sir, that was literally the issue. I tried to move around him, but my shoulder hit the wall, my foot slipped, and my hand caught the bathroom door frame instead of the coat rack. I don't remember choosing the bathroom. I think my body just went toward the closest open door because I was losing air, and everyone in that room still thought I was making a scene. I shut the door, locked it. I don't even remember deciding to lock it. The bathroom was tiny, with a cabinet under the sink and a rug my mother was weirdly proud of. I slid down beside the toilet, which isn't exactly the glamorous near-death setting one dreams of. My phone was already in my jeans pocket because I had checked the time during dinner. Yes. Rude, whatever. It ended up saving me. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I could hear muffled voices outside, my mother saying something like, "She locked herself in there now," and my father saying, "Let her cool off. Let her cool off." My face was swelling. My tongue felt too big. My throat was closing in little steps, each one worse than the last. I know people say you should call emergency services directly. I know. But my thumb went to my friend's pinned contact because she knew the address. She knew my allergy. And I could barely push air through my throat, let alone explain anything to a dispatcher. I tried to send a voice message. "He put peanut in my food," I said, or tried to say. "I can't breathe. I'm at my parents' house." I wanted to say, "Please help me." But my voice gave out halfway through something pathetic and raspy. I sent it anyway. Then the phone slipped onto the rug, and I remember thinking my mother was going to be mad if I drooled on it. That is what brains do when they are terrified. They grab the dumbest detail in the room and hold on. I don't remember the ambulance arriving. I remember pounding, maybe on the bathroom door, or maybe in my head. I remember my father's voice suddenly not angry, suddenly scared, which made me weirdly resentful even while I was barely conscious because, oh, now we are scared? I remember a stranger's voice telling me to stay with them. I remember the bathroom door open, bright hallway light, My mother crying in a way that sounded like she was performing for an audience, even though maybe that is unfair. Maybe she really was scared. Maybe both things can be true. The paramedics were direct and fast and didn't ask whether I was being dramatic, which felt weirdly kind. Someone asked about exposure. My mother said, "She sometimes panics about food." I tried to lift my hand. I don't know if anyone saw. My friend had called emergency services after hearing my message, and she stayed on the phone with dispatch until help got there. Later, she told me she was shaking so hard she had to repeat the address twice. She also told me my mother kept saying, "We didn't know it was real." My friend said she almost screamed, "How could you not know?" But she didn't, because unlike my family, she understood that the emergency wasn't about her feelings. At the hospital, I came back to myself in pieces. Fluorescent light, a curtain, my throat raw, my face tight and swollen, a monitor beeping. My mother sitting with her purse clutched in her lap like she had been personally mugged by my immune system. My father stood near the wall with his arms crossed. My brother wasn't there, which somehow hurt even though I didn't want to see him. For a second, I thought maybe I had imagined the worst part. Maybe it had been a terrible contamination accident. Maybe my brother had looked guilty because everyone looks weird in a crisis. My brain was already trying to protect them because apparently trauma likes to wear a little clown hat. Then I heard my mother talking to a nurse outside the curtain. "She gets anxious," she said in a low voice. "She's always been very sensitive about food." The nurse didn't respond in the warm, soothing way my mother expected. She said, "A severe allergic reaction isn't anxiety." I loved that nurse. I would have married that nurse in that moment if my throat had allowed vows. When the nurse came in, she asked my parents to step outside so she could check on me privately. My mother looked offended. My father looked relieved to have an instruction. Once they were gone, the nurse leaned closer and asked very gently, "Do you feel safe telling me what happened?" That question split me open more than anything else. Not because it was dramatic, because it was simple. A stranger had watched my parents for 10 minutes and saw something wrong that my own family had spent years pretending was normal. I tried to talk, but my voice sounded like I had swallowed sandpaper. I told her I thought my brother put peanut in the sauce. I told her my parents didn't get my bag. I told her I had asked. I told her I had sent a message to my friend because I knew they weren't helping. Saying it out loud made it real in a way I hated. I felt stupid. I felt ashamed. I felt like a child tattling after a prank went too far, except the prank had almost closed my airway. My friend arrived before I was discharged from observation. She had thrown a sweatshirt over pajama pants and looked like she had driven through a hurricane even though the weather was clear. The second she saw me, her face crumpled, and I started crying too because finally someone was reacting the correct amount. My mother hated that. I could feel it. She kept hovering, saying, "She's okay now," like she was trying to close a tab on a computer. My friend said, "She isn't okay," and I swear the room went colder. My father asked if we could not do this here. My friend looked at him and said, "Where would you prefer to discuss how nobody helped her?" I wanted to laugh. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to stand on the bed and applaud. Instead, I whispered, "Please don't fight." Because even then, even after all of it, my instinct was to manage the room so my parents didn't get mad. That part embarrasses me the most. The doctor explained what had happened in plain, terrifying words: severe allergic reaction, airway involvement, need for strict avoidance, carry medication at all times, follow up with my allergist, return immediately if symptoms came back. My mother nodded like she was being graded. My father asked if stress could have made it worse, and the doctor said stress could make someone feel worse, but exposure caused the reaction. I watched my father's jaw tighten, not because he was grieving what happened to me, because the answer didn't give him a loophole. When the doctor left, my mother leaned toward me and said, "We need to be careful what we say next." Not, "I am sorry." Not, "I should have gotten your bag." Careful what we say. My father added, "Your brother is a minor. This could ruin his future." I was lying there with tape on my arm and a throat that felt shredded, and they were already building a little fence around him. I whispered, "He could have killed me." My mother flinched like I had slapped her. "Don't say that. It's true." My father lowered his voice in the way he did when he wanted to scare me without looking like he was scaring me. "We don't know anything yet. Accusing your brother of something like that because you felt panicked is serious." My friend made a sound beside me, but I put a hand out because I knew if she jumped in, my parents would use her anger as evidence that I had been influenced. My mother said, "He made a mistake if anything. Kids do stupid things. He was 17, not 7. And even 7-year-olds understand not to put poison in someone's food. But again, I was tired. My body felt like it had been dragged behind a truck. My voice hurt. I wanted to go home. So I said nothing, and they took that silence as victory. At home in my apartment later that night, because I did eventually insist on leaving, I sat on my kitchen floor and listened to the voice message I had sent my friend. It was only a few seconds. My voice barely sounded human. He put peanut in my food. I can't breathe. I'm at my parents' house. Then a scraping sound, then nothing. I played it once. Then again, because I am apparently the kind of person who pokes bruises to see if they still hurt. My friend sat beside me and cried silently while I stared at my phone. "You need to save that," she said. "Send it to me, email it to yourself, put it somewhere they can't touch." She was right. I hated that she was right. Part of me wanted to delete it and pretend the whole night had been a nightmare. Another part of me, the part that had been called dramatic for 24 years, wanted to print it on a banner and hang it over my mother's dining table. The next morning, my mother texted, "Mother, how are you feeling?" For half a second, I thought maybe this was the apology. I wrote, "My throat hurts and I feel awful." She replied, "Your brother didn't sleep. He is terrified you are going to make this bigger than it needs to be." There it was. Not, "He is terrified he hurt you." Not, "He wants to apologize." He was terrified of consequences. I typed about 9 different responses and deleted them because every version sounded insane. Finally, I wrote, "Did he put peanut in my food?" My mother answered, "We need to talk as a family." That told me enough. My father called during my lunch break at work, and I ignored it because I was sitting in the break room with soup I could barely swallow, and if I heard his voice, I was going to either sob or commit a felony with a plastic spoon. He left a voicemail saying we needed to be measured. My father loved words like that when he meant obedient. 2 days after the dinner, my friend called me after work and said, "Don't panic," which is a great way to make someone immediately panic. She told me a boy from my brother's friend group had messaged her through a social app because he knew she was close to me. Apparently, the story had started spreading in little teenage pieces because, of course, my brother, genius of the century, had been posting in a group chat before and after the dinner. The boy sent screenshots. I opened them sitting in my car outside my apartment, and I swear the whole parking lot tilted. There was my brother's message from before dinner. I'm going to test if she can actually tell or if she just likes being special. Another one, tiny bit of peanut butter in her sauce. She won't even know. Afterward, when someone asked if I was okay, he wrote, "She went full drama queen, but now my parents are acting weird." Full drama queen. I had been unconscious on a bathroom floor while he summarized me like a bad review. My parents found out about the screenshots before I told them. I still don't know whether my brother confessed that someone sent them or whether one of his friends panicked. Either way, my mother called me that evening with a voice so tight it could cut wire. "Why are you collecting things?" she asked. Not, "Why did he write that?" Not, "Are you okay after seeing it?" Collecting things. Like I was building a scrapbook. I said, "Because he admitted he did it." She said, "Teenagers exaggerate in group chats. So now he's exaggerating about poisoning me?" She snapped, "Don't use that word." There were a lot of words my mother didn't want me to use. Poison, abuse, neglect, almost died. Funny how the truth becomes rude when it points at the wrong person. My father got on the line, which meant they had put me on speaker. I could picture them at the kitchen table, my mother with one hand pressed to her forehead, my father sitting stiffly, my brother somewhere nearby pretending not to listen. My father said, "If you go down this road, you need to think about what happens." I said, "To me or to him?" Silence. That silence answered too. Then he said the part I still hear sometimes when I can't sleep. "We have helped you with your medical expenses before. Your mother and I aren't obligated to keep doing that if you decide to attack this family." Attack this family. I was the one with the hospital bracelet still in my trash can. I was the one checking my throat every time I swallowed. But in his mind, the attack started when I stopped absorbing damage politely. I said, "Are you threatening me?" He said, "I'm explaining reality." I hung up because if I stayed on the phone, I was going to say something that made me sound exactly as unhinged as they wanted me to be. I didn't handle the next few days gracefully. Let me be honest about that. I stalked my brother's social pages from a backup account, like a raccoon with Wi-Fi. I refreshed family group messages even though I had muted them. I drafted a public post with the screenshots attached and a caption that was basically, "Since everyone wants to call me dramatic, here's the drama." I didn't post it, thank God, but I came close. I sent my mother one long text at midnight that started with "You failed me" and ended with "I hope you remember my face on that bathroom floor forever," which was maybe true, but also not my finest literary work. She replied the next morning with, "This is the kind of cruelty we are worried about." Cruelty. I was cruel for naming what happened. My brother was confused, young, impulsive, scared, influenced, joking, misunderstood, anything except responsible. The family machine started moving fast. My mother called my aunt, then my grandmother, then probably half the people who had ever eaten potato salad in our backyard. The version she told was slippery. She didn't outright say I was lying. She said things like, "There was a reaction at dinner and now Zadie thinks her brother did something on purpose." She said, "You know how intense she gets." She said, "We are trying to keep this from destroying him." That last one got me. Destroying him. He was still going to school, still sleeping in his room, still eating my mother's breakfasts. I was the one who couldn't take a bite of food I hadn't prepared myself without shaking. But because his consequences were visible and mine were internal, his counted more. The first person in my family to actually come see me was my aunt, and even that started badly. She showed up at my apartment with a casserole, which would have been sweet if it didn't feel like emotional bait in a glass dish. I didn't eat it. I know that sounds rude, but no, absolutely not. She noticed and looked hurt. I said, "I'm sorry, I can't." She said, "Zadie, I didn't put anything in it." I said, "That isn't how fear works." She sat on my couch and told me my mother was a mess. My father was angry, my brother was spiraling, and everyone was worried. I said, "About me?" She looked away. That was the answer. Then she gave the speech. Family handles things inside the family. Police and lawyers make things ugly. My brother made a stupid choice. My parents made mistakes, but they love me. I listened until my ears felt hot. Then I played the voice message. I didn't plan to. I had told myself I would keep it for a lawyer, not use it like a weapon. But sitting there while my aunt described the whole thing like a kitchen accident made something in me snap. I opened the file and hit play. My own raspy voice filled the room. "He put peanut in my food. I can't breathe. I'm at my parents' house." Then the scraping, the silence. My aunt's face changed, not all at once. It was like watching someone slowly understand a language they had been pretending not to speak. She put a hand over her mouth. I said, "They were at the table. My bag was in the hall. I asked them." She whispered, "They didn't get it?" I shook my head. She stared at the casserole like it had offended her. Then she said very quietly, "I need to talk to your mother." I said, "That isn't my problem anymore." Harsh? Maybe. But I had spent my whole life making my mother's feelings my emergency. I was done. Of course, my aunt talking to my mother turned into a family meeting because apparently my relatives believed every disaster could be solved by putting too many angry people in one living room. I refused at first. Then my grandmother called crying, and I hate that it worked on me, but it did. She said she wanted to hear from me directly. She said she didn't understand what happened. She said, "Please, just come before things go too far." Things had already gone too far in a bathroom with my face swelling, but fine. I agreed on one condition. My friend came with me. My mother said that was unnecessary. I said, "Then I'm not coming." She accused me of bringing an audience. I said, "No, I'm bringing a witness." That shut her up for about 4 seconds. A personal record. My grandmother started with, "We all love each other." I almost walked out right there. Nothing good has ever followed that sentence. My mother cried first because of course she did. She said she hadn't slept, that no mother wants to see her children at war, that I needed to understand how scared everyone was. I said, "I was scared when I couldn't breathe." My father said, "No one is denying that." My friend whispered, "You literally are." And I had to bite the inside of my cheek not to smile. My brother finally spoke and said, "I didn't think it would actually do anything." I asked, "Then why hide it in the sauce?" He said nothing. My aunt, the casserole aunt, leaned forward and said, "Answer her." My mother snapped, "Don't interrogate him." My aunt snapped back, "Someone should have before now." And just like that, the family room split down the middle. The argument got messy, very messy. People talked over each other. My grandmother cried. My father said my brother had already learned his lesson. I asked what lesson that was. Exactly, because from where I was sitting, his lesson seemed to be, "Mommy and Daddy will form a human shield if you commit attempted manslaughter at dinner." My mother gasped and said I was being vile. I said, "Good. I learned from the best." Not proud of that one. Well, maybe a little. My brother muttered that I had always wanted everyone against him. I turned to him so fast my friend grabbed my wrist. "I wanted you to stop treating my body like a dare," I said. "That isn't the same thing." He looked away. Still no real apology. Just shame, anger, and fear mixed together, which isn't remorse no matter how badly parents want it to be. I played the voice message for everyone. I hadn't planned to do it there either, but the room kept sliding away from reality, and I needed something that didn't care about their feelings. My voice rasped through my grandmother's living room. For once, nobody interrupted. When it ended, my grandmother covered her face. My aunt cried openly. One uncle stared at my father like he had never seen him before. My mother looked cornered, which made her meaner. She said, "We didn't know." My friend said, "She told you." My father said, "We thought she was panicking." I said, "Because you always think that." And there it was. The whole story in one sentence. They had trained themselves not to believe me so well that when I was actually in danger, disbelief felt responsible. After that meeting, things got colder, not better. My mother sent a message saying she was heartbroken by how I humiliated everyone. My brother sent nothing. My father sent a link to some article about teenagers making poor decisions under peer pressure, which I didn't open because I enjoy having blood pressure in a survivable range. My aunt, though, called me the next day and apologized. Not the dramatic kind where the apology is secretly about making the apologizer feel pure. She said, "I repeated your mother's version before I heard yours. I am sorry. I cried so hard I had to sit on the bathroom floor again, which felt rude of my body, considering what happened last time." She offered to help me find a lawyer, not because she wanted to punish my brother, she said, but because my parents were already trying to manage the story, and I needed someone who wasn't emotionally tangled in it. The lawyer I spoke to worked out of a small office above a tax place. Not exactly glamorous, but she had a calm face and didn't flinch when I told her everything. She asked for the audio, screenshots, medical papers, and any messages from my parents. She explained things without turning it into a television show. There might be a police report, there might be a juvenile investigation because my brother was a minor. My parents' failure to help might matter, especially if I had clearly asked for medication and they refused. Some things would depend on local officials and what could be proven. It wouldn't be fast, clean, or emotionally satisfying. "This process won't give you the family response you deserved," she said. I appreciated that. Everyone else kept acting like the legal part was a magic wand or a nuclear bomb. She treated it like what it was, a tool, imperfect and stressful, but possibly necessary. I filed the report 2 days later. My friend came with me, and my aunt waited in the parking lot because she said she didn't want me walking out alone. I wore jeans and a sweater and kept rubbing my hands on my thighs because they were sweating. The officer who took my statement wasn't warm, exactly, but he was professional. That mattered. He listened. He asked when I ate, when symptoms started, where my medication was, who was present, what my brother said before and after. I gave him the screenshots. I played the audio. My voice in that little interview room sounded even worse than I remembered. The officer paused after it ended and said, "That is difficult to listen to." I nodded because if I spoke, I was going to break. He asked if I wanted a victim advocate to contact me. I said yes because I was trying this new thing where I accepted help before collapsing. Revolutionary, truly. My brother was interviewed at some point. I don't know everything he said because the process moved in pieces and nobody was handing me a neat little folder like in a show. What I heard later, through the lawyer and through the family gossip pipeline I pretended not to care about but absolutely did, was that he admitted to putting a small amount of peanut product in the sauce but insisted he didn't understand it could get that serious. That would have been easier to believe if his messages hadn't literally said he wanted to test if I could tell. Also, he had lived with my allergy his entire life. He had seen the auto-injectors. He had heard the doctors. He had watched my mother roll her eyes at restaurant questions. He knew enough to hide it. That was the part I couldn't let anyone soften. If you hide something because you know the person would refuse it, you understand consent at least enough to violate it. While the investigation crawled forward, my body became a haunted house. I checked food labels 3 times, then still couldn't eat. I bought sealed foods and panicked if the packaging looked slightly bent. I stopped going to staff lunches at work. A coworker brought cookies one day and placed them near the copier, and I had to go to the bathroom and cry because my brain decided cookies were now enemy devices. I hated it. I hated being afraid. I hated giving my family the satisfaction of turning me into the fragile thing they always called me. My friend reminded me that trauma after a real threat isn't weakness. I told her that was a very healthy statement, and I found it annoying. She brought me safe groceries anyway, then sat on my kitchen counter while I made plain pasta like a suspicious raccoon. I snapped at her once because she moved a cutting board without asking. She said, "Okay, I'm going to forgive that because you are a mess, but don't talk to me like your mother talks to you." That shut me up. She was right. Pain doesn't make you entitled to pass it around. My brother's school found out mostly because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. That sounds mean, but truly, the boy had one job: stop making everything worse. Instead, he told teammates that I was trying to get him arrested over a stupid joke. Someone's parent heard. Then a coach heard. Then the school called my parents. He was temporarily pulled from games while they reviewed what happened because apparently schools don't love students bragging about putting allergens in people's food. My mother blamed me for that too, which was bold since I hadn't contacted the school. She sent a message saying, "I hope you are happy. He may lose his season." I typed, "I almost lost my life," then deleted it because she knew. She knew and didn't care in the way I needed her to care. Instead, I forwarded the message to the lawyer, because that was my new hobby: scrapbooking threats. The last real pressure campaign came from my father, because my mother was emotional chaos, but my father preferred strategy. He texted me a long message, which was unusual because he normally believed anything longer than okay was a novel. He wrote that he and my mother had discussed it and were willing to cover my medical bills from the incident, help with future allergy care, and contribute toward therapy, but only if I clarified to authorities that I didn't believe anyone intended serious harm and that the family wanted to resolve it privately. He said this would protect my brother while still helping me. He said it was a reasonable compromise. I read it in my work parking lot and felt my hands go cold. Reasonable compromise. Between what? My safety and their reputation? My truth and his future? I didn't answer. I sent it to the lawyer. She called me within the hour and said, "Don't respond. Save everything." Her voice was calm, but I could tell she wasn't happy. Apparently offering money tied to changing my statement wasn't the loving gesture my father imagined it to be. That same night, my brother finally texted me. I had expected anger. What I got was worse because it was almost an apology if you squinted in bad lighting. "I am sorry things got this bad," he wrote. Things got this bad. Like the situation had wandered off by itself and knocked over a lamp. He said he didn't mean to hurt me like that, which left a lot of room for the amount of hurting he had meant to do. He said everyone hated him now. He said he might lose his team, his friends, maybe college options later. He said he knew I was mad, but asked me to remember he was my brother. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I wrote, "I remember. That is why it hurt this much." I didn't send anything else. He sent a paragraph about how I didn't understand what pressure he was under, how people expected him to be funny, how sometimes jokes went too far. I almost threw my phone. Being funny is saying something stupid at dinner, not secretly testing whether your sister's allergy is real. The temporary court-related steps weren't dramatic in the way people think. There were no shouting matches in front of a judge while someone gasped from the back row. It was forms, calls, waiting, statements, appointments, and me learning that accountability is often boring before it is anything else. Because my brother was a minor, things stayed mostly within a juvenile process, and I was told not to expect some huge public punishment. That was never really what I wanted anyway. I wanted the official record to say this happened. I wanted someone outside our family to look at my parents and brother and say, "No, this wasn't a joke," and "No, her reaction didn't create the danger." The victim advocate helped me understand protective options and safety planning without making it sound like I needed to hide under a bridge. We talked about contact boundaries, medical information, emergency contacts, and documenting harassment. Normal, practical things. Life after family betrayal is apparently a lot of admin. I changed my emergency contact forms first. At work, at my doctor's office, at my allergist. I removed my mother and father and put my friend. My hand shook the first time I wrote her name in that little box. Not because I doubted her, but because it felt like admitting I had become parentless in the ways that matter during emergencies. I also stopped sharing any insurance-related accounts with my parents, even though it cost more and made me furious every time I paid. My father had used medical help as leverage once. I wasn't giving him the handle again. I picked up extra hours at work when I could. My boss pretended not to notice when I cried over a spreadsheet one afternoon, then left a snack on my desk with a note saying she checked the ingredients. I kept the note in my drawer. Some kindnesses are tiny and still rearrange your insides. My mother tried different doors after direct guilt stopped working. She sent childhood photos. She sent recipes. She sent a message saying she found one of my old school projects in a closet and remembered how creative and tender I had been. Tender. That word made me so angry I had to walk around the block. She loved my softness when it was nostalgic. She hated it when it had needs. I didn't respond. Then she got sharper. You have no idea what this is doing to me. Your father barely speaks. Your brother cries at night. Your grandmother's blood pressure is up. Everyone's body was suddenly my responsibility except mine. I saved the messages. Sometimes I read them when I felt guilty, not to torture myself, but to remind myself that they were still centering themselves even after everything. My aunt told me to stop rereading them. She was right. I didn't stop immediately. I am not a wellness influencer. I am a stubborn woman with receipts. One thing nobody warns you about is how grief and anger take turns driving. Some mornings I woke up so furious I wanted to send my mother a list titled, "Ways You Failed Me," organized by decade. Other mornings I wanted to call her and ask if she remembered the winter she stayed up with me when I had a fever, or the time she drove across town because I forgot my lunch at school. Those memories were real too. That was the worst part. If she had always been terrible, leaving would have felt cleaner. But she had moments of warmth. My father did too. He taught me how to check my tire pressure. He once fixed my bathroom sink at midnight because I was crying about the leak. My brother, when he was small, used to crawl into my bed during storms. I didn't lose cardboard villains. I lost people who had loved me badly enough that the love became dangerous. Try explaining that without sounding dramatic. A few months passed, though past makes it sound smooth. It was more like time dragged itself over gravel. My brother's case stayed in the juvenile system, with consequences that were serious to him, but not the public disaster my parents claimed. There were meetings, restrictions, counseling requirements, school discipline, and a lot of angry silence from him. My parents were formally questioned about what happened that night and about the messages afterward. I wasn't promised some huge outcome, and I had to make peace with that. Accountability didn't look like lightning striking the dining table. It looked like records, mandated conversations, bills they couldn't guilt me into hiding, relatives who no longer swallowed my mother's version whole, and my own name removed from the list of people available to be sacrificed for family comfort. I decided to pick up the last of my things from my parents' house on a Saturday, because apparently I enjoy symbolic pain with weekend availability. My friend insisted on coming. My aunt offered too, but I said no because I didn't want a parade. I just wanted my old boxes, a few books, some winter clothes, and the ugly ceramic mug I made as a kid that my mother kept even though it looked like a melted boot. I told my mother by text exactly when I was coming. She replied, "This feels unnecessary." I wrote, "I am getting my belongings." She wrote, "You are always so cold now." I stared at that one for a while because the old me would have defended herself. The new me, who wasn't exactly healed but had at least upgraded her boundaries from wet tissue to cardboard, didn't answer. The house looked the same when we pulled up, which offended me. I wanted it to look cursed. I wanted dead grass, cracked windows, maybe a dramatic crow. Instead, the lawn was trimmed. The porch light was on, and my mother's seasonal wreath was hanging on the door like nothing had happened. My friend squeezed my hand before we went in. "We get the stuff and leave," she said. "No emotional side quests." I nodded. Then my mother opened the door and immediately said, "You brought her." My friend smiled with absolutely no warmth. "Sure did." My father was in the living room standing near the doorway like a security guard in socks. My brother wasn't there, or at least not visible. Good. I didn't trust myself around him. Not because I would hurt him, because I still wanted him to understand. And wanting that from someone committed to self-pity is how you reopen wounds. My mother had packed some of my things already, which should have been helpful, but felt invasive, because of course she had gone through them. The boxes were in the hallway near the same coat rack where my tote bag had hung that night. I looked at the spot before I could stop myself. My mother noticed. "Are you going to make every corner of this house into a crime scene?" she asked. My friend made a sharp sound, but I answered first. "No, just the one where my medication sat while you told me to stop making a scene." My mother's face folded. For 1 second, I thought she might finally say it. "I am sorry. I failed you. I should have moved. I should have listened. Something. Anything." Instead, she said, "You have no idea what it is like to be a mother watching both your children suffer." And there it was, the same old magic trick. My suffering and his consequences placed side by side like equal tragedies, with her in the middle as the true victim. My father stepped in because he couldn't stand emotional mess unless he was controlling it. "Your brother made a mistake," he said. His voice was low, steady, rehearsed. "A terrible one, but you decided to make it permanent." I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because my body needed to release pressure somehow. "He put peanut in my food," I said. "You ignored me when I asked for help. That is what made it permanent." My father shook his head like I was still misunderstanding a simple lesson. Families survive mistakes when people choose forgiveness, I said. Families survive when people choose safety before reputation. My mother started crying then. Real tears, maybe fake timing, maybe both. She said, "I don't know who you are anymore." That one actually hurt. I picked up a box anyway. "I think that's the problem," I said. "I do." We carried boxes to my car in 3 trips. My friend kept things moving like a professional emotional bouncer. No lingering in my old room. No sorting through memories while my mother watched. No letting my father pull me aside. On the last trip, I went upstairs alone for the mug because it was still on a shelf in my old closet. My room had become half storage, half shrine, which was very my mother. Old trophies, dusty books, a lamp that didn't work, and a plastic bin labeled with my name in her handwriting. For a second, I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel it. Not forgiveness, not regret, just grief. I had spent so many years trying to earn a safe place in that house. And the truth was, I had outgrown the fantasy before I admitted the fantasy was dead. My phone buzzed. A message from my brother. "Hope you're happy taking everything from everyone." I stared at it, then blocked him. No speech, no paragraph, no final lesson, just block. When I came downstairs, my mother was standing by the front door holding one of my old school projects from another box. "You forgot this," she said, even though I hadn't asked for it. Then she noticed the mug in my hand and looked embarrassed, like she had been trying to hand me one last piece of the past, and realized I was already carrying the piece I actually wanted. For one strange second, we were just 2 women standing in a hallway, each holding a different piece of the past and neither knowing what to do with it. She whispered, "Please don't leave like this." I wanted to ask, like what? Alive? Angry? Believed? Instead I said, "I already left. This is just me picking up my stuff." My father looked away. My mother cried harder. My friend opened the door. I stepped over the threshold and didn't turn around, not because I was strong in some cinematic way, but because I knew if I looked back, I would see my mother crying and my father stiff with pride and that stupid coat rack behind them, and some sick little part of me might still want to make them feel better. I drove home with the boxes rattling in the backseat and my friend following in her car behind me. At a red light, I started crying so hard I had to pull into a parking lot. My friend pulled in beside me and got into my passenger seat without asking. We sat there while I ugly cried into my sleeves like a toddler. "I hate them," I said. Then, immediately, "I don't hate them." Then, "I do." Then, "I miss them." She handed me napkins from her glove compartment and said, "All of that can be true." I hated how often she was right. I cried until my head hurt. Then I laughed because one of the napkins had old ketchup on the corner and I'd almost wiped my face with it. My friend said, "That would have really completed the look." And somehow, in the middle of the worst day, I laughed like an idiot in a parking lot with swollen eyes and a car full of boxes. That isn't a neat ending. It is just what happened. I wish I could say everything became peaceful after that. But peace isn't a switch. My mother still found ways to send messages through relatives. My father sent one holiday card with only his name and hers, like we were business associates after a failed contract. My brother stayed blocked. Sometimes I heard updates I didn't ask for. He was doing counseling. He changed schools. He told people I ruined his senior year. Maybe he believed that. Maybe believing it was easier than sitting with the truth. I stopped arguing with imaginary versions of him in the shower, mostly. Not completely. I am human. I still sometimes think of the sauce, the taste of it, the way he watched me, the way my mother said, "What now?" before she knew what now would cost. Those memories don't disappear just because you make the right choice. But they got quieter when I stopped bringing them back to the people who created them and begging them to interpret the pain correctly. My apartment changed slowly. I cleaned out my cabinets. I bought better storage containers. I put my medication in places I could reach, not hidden in a polite tote bag because someone disliked clutter. I taped an allergy action plan inside a kitchen cabinet, not because I needed the aesthetic of medical paperwork with my cereal, but because I liked seeing proof that my safety had instructions, and I was allowed to follow them. My friend joked that my apartment was becoming responsible adult chic, which mostly meant labeled bins and fewer doom piles. I started therapy even though I was skeptical, broke, and annoyed by the phrase body memory. Unfortunately, body memory is real. Some sessions were about the dinner. Some were about guilt, because guilt is stubborn and stupid and often shows up wearing your mother's voice. Every so often, someone tries to turn the story into a lesson about forgiveness. They ask whether I think I will ever speak to my parents again. They ask if maybe, with time, everyone can heal. I understand why people ask. Estrangement makes people nervous because it suggests love has limits, and people prefer to believe family is a magical contract that survives anything. But I don't have a pretty answer. Maybe one day my mother will understand that an apology isn't the same as wanting access. Maybe my father will realize protecting my brother from consequences didn't protect him from becoming the kind of man who avoids responsibility. Maybe my brother will grow up and feel horror instead of resentment. Maybe none of that will happen. I can't build my life around maybe anymore. What I know is this. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't difficult. I wasn't ruining dinner. I was a woman with a real allergy who asked for help and didn't get it from the people who should have moved fastest. That sentence took me months to say without shaking. Now I can say it and breathe. Not perfectly. Not always. But enough. And if that makes me cold, if that makes me unforgiving, if that makes me the villain in the version they tell at tables where I no longer sit, fine. They can have the table. They can have the sauce, the jokes, the edited story, the relatives who still prefer comfort over truth. I kept my life. I kept my voice. I kept the ugly mug. And when I close my apartment door at night, with my own food in my own kitchen and my emergency contact changed to someone who actually answers, I don't feel like I destroyed a family. I feel like I finally stopped letting one destroy me.